السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So my lecture today is the distinguishing foundations or principles of the Salafi da'wah. And I want to mention 5 principles which are mentioned or which are taken from the writings and the speech of Sheikh Rabi' ibn Hadi Hafidhahullah Ta'ala. As you know, the Sheikh has a distinguished role in clarifying the methodology of the prophets in calling to Allah, the methodology of Ahlus Sunnah in calling to Allah, and out of that, few decades, many decades in being involved in this call and having to deal with the various firaq and the jama'at, then there is in the Shaykh's speech clarification as to what distinguishes the manhaj of Ahlus Sunnah from the other manahij in terms of how they are distinguished and how the fact that they follow the Quran and the Sunnah and the way of the prophets and messengers in calling the ummah to Tawheed, in rectifying the ummah, in unifying the ummah. So these 5 principles I want to go through. They are as follows, inshallah, if we have time to go through all of them. The first of them, from the distinguishing features, is that they hold fast to the methodology of the prophets in calling to Allah. Iltizam manhaj al-anbiya fi ad-da'wati ila Allah. So the people of Tawheed and Sunnah, the people upon the way of the Salaf, very clearly we see from them when they make da'wah to Allah, they adhere to the way of the prophets no matter what the circumstances. Whatever the circumstances might be, whatever economic circumstances, political circumstances, social circumstances, they hold fast to the methodology of the prophets in calling to Allah. They never let go of that. The second of the principles is that they call to the book and the Sunnah, and that's what they unite the people upon. Right? Ad-da'watu ila al-kitabi wa sunnah wa jam'u an-nas alayhima. So again, when you look at their call, it is distinguished from all of the other da'awat in that they are calling people to the Quran and the Sunnah, to understand it, to comprehend it, to act upon it, and then the unity that they call to is a unity around the Quran and the Sunnah as opposed to other things. The third of their distinguishing foundations and principles is ittiba'u sunnah wal jama'ah, that they call to following the Sunnah and maintaining unity and warning wa tahdhir min ash-shududh wal khilaf wal furqa, and they warn from splitting and dissension and opposition and those things that destroy the unity of the Muslims and of the Sunnah and the Jama'ah. Fourthly, what they are distinguished with is al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa-nahi anil munkar, that they enjoin the good and they prohibit the evil in the way of the prophets and the messengers and the companions and the salaf. And they are distinguished in that respect, in that when they enjoin the good and prohibit the evil, it includes many of the evils that all the other jama'at and the firq, that they will not enjoin that good or they will not prohibit that evil. And we shall look at that inshaAllah ta'ala. And the 5th one is ar-raddu ala al-mukhalif, a refutation of the opposer, the one who opposes the truth, no matter who it might be, whether it is from the people of disbelief, whether it is from the people of Islam, from the people of bid'ah, even from Ahlus Sunnah, when there is a mukhalif who opposes the truth, that could be intentional or unintentional, then they do not allow any opposition to take root, and they give advice and they refute in accordance with the status and position of the opposer. So to begin with, I want to bring a quote from the Shaykh, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala. And the first point he mentions here in the Tawheed is that he says that the da'wah to Allah is established upon knowledge, upon basira, and it emanates from sincerity to Allah and to His book and to His messenger and to the leaders of the Muslims and to the common people. And that this da'wah, whoever is engaged in this da'wah, this is the best of things that anybody can inherit from the prophets and messengers. Meaning to be a caller to Allah. To call with the call of the prophets and messengers, this is the best inheritance that anyone can take. He then goes on to define, what do we mean when we say ad-da'watu ilallah, when we call to Allah? Practically speaking, what does that mean? He brings a definition or an explanation from Shaykhul Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, which essentially means that we call people to what is in the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam. Because that hadith has explained the entire religion. So the Shaykh goes on to say that ad-da'wa ilallah, calling to Allah, is calling to iman in Allah and in what the messengers came with, and to believe in whatever information or reports they bring to us about the unseen, about paradise, about hellfire, about the hereafter, and so on and so forth. And then to obey them in all of that. And within this call is included the shahadatan, the two testimonies of faith, and likewise establishing the prayer and fasting the month of Ramadan and giving zakah and performing hajj. Right? So it is a call to Islam. Islam and its 5 pillars. Likewise also it is a call to iman, to believe in Allah, to believe in those things which are from the unseen to us in the life of this world, to believe in Allah and to believe in His angels, to believe in His books, His messengers, the last day, and al-qadar, the good and the evil. And likewise to call them to worship Allah as if they see Him, and even though they do not see Him, He certainly sees them, which is al-ihsan. So basically, when we say ad-da'watu ilallah, that we call to Allah, we are calling the people to the 3 levels of Islam, which is Islam and Iman and al-ihsan. And as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in the hadith of Jibreel, he said, "Hada Jibreel ja'akum yu'allimukum dinakum." This is Jibreel, he came to you to teach you your religion. So this means that the da'wah to Allah is effectively to call the people to what is in the contents of what is in the hadith of Jibreel. And this is from Shaykhul Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. Now the Shaykh goes on to explain that this call that we just mentioned is in fact the call of every single messenger. And this is included in those ayat which you are familiar with. The statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. That we have raised in every nation a messenger calling that you should worship Allah and avoid the false deities. This ayah and the other ayah, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن قَبْلِكَ مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا نُوحِي إِلَيْهِ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنَا فَاعْبُدُونَ. That indeed we never sent before you any messenger except that we inspired to him that there is none worthy of worship except me, so worship me alone. So in other words, what we explained of the da'wah to Allah, which is the hadith of Jibreel, Islam, Iman, Ihsan, and calling the people to that, this is what every single messenger, what they call to. The Shaykh goes on to explain that whoever follows the prophets and messengers in making this call, then he is included in the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. That who is better than the one who calls to Allah and who does righteous deeds and he says, indeed, I am from among the Muslims. Right? These are the best people upon Allah's earth after the prophets and messengers and their companions. He also goes on to say that whoever calls to Allah and His Messenger and His messengers, then just as Allah and His Messenger gave hifz, protection, and isma, meaning a type of, again, protection also from being harmed by the people, then that person will receive that same protection to the extent to which he follows the prophets and messengers in calling to Allah. So in other words, he's saying that the callers to Allah, ad-du'at ilallah, they are the khulafa, they are the successors. They succeed the prophets and messengers in making this call. The Shaykh then goes on to mention something very important, and he says, وَتَبْلِيغ سُنَّتَهُ إِلَى الْأُمَّةِ أَفْضَلُ مِنْ تَبْلِيغ السِّهَامِ إِلَى نُحُورِ الْعَدُوِّ. Which means that to convey the sunnah, to convey the affairs of the religion, what it contains of beliefs, what it contains of methodologies, what it contains of issues of worship and mu'amalat, to teach the people and convey them to the Muslims, to this ummah, this is more superior and more excellent than shooting arrows and spearheads against the enemy. Why? Because in this is the preservation of the religion itself, and this is why the people of Tawheed, the people of the Sunnah, they spend a large part of their time in conveying the Sunnah to the Muslim Ummah itself. Right? Because they want to preserve the capital of Islam, to maintain it and protect it from, ruin and loss. So with this introduction, the Shaykh then, we can move to the first distinguishing principle, which is iltizam manhaj al-anbiya fi ad-da'wati ila Allah. That the people of Tawheed and the Sunnah who follow the way of the Salaf, that they adhere strictly to following the methodology of the prophets and messengers in calling to Allah. As you know, the Shaykh, Hafidhahullah, he wrote a book, Manhajul Anbiya fi Da'wati ila Allah, the methodology of the prophets in calling to Allah. Within this book, he explained with many evidences from the stories of many of the prophets that the prophets, they began with Tawheed despite all types of corruption in the society. Whether that corruption is in siyasa, in politics, whether it is in al-hukm, the rulership, whether it is in akhlaq, the people's manners and morals, whether it is in their mu'amalat, in their dealings, their trade dealings. Despite all of these issues being present, we find that the prophets and messengers consistently, that they began with the call to Tawheed. And this is because, as the Shaykh explains, that the legislations, the shara'i', the legislations, that they do not and cannot be built except upon sound beliefs. Right? So the legislations of Allah, which are practical, to do with the law and with the legislation, and to do with the actions and dealings of the people, that law cannot be established except upon sound creed and sound beliefs. And to do otherwise would be a bit like when you have a tree whose trunk and root has been destroyed. What will happen? Everything else will perish, it will die. So after making this point, the Shaykh goes on to say that the prophets and messengers, why do we find that they spent the overwhelming majority of their time in calling to Tawheed, warning against shirk? And why is it that we never saw them, for example, to give a position against any tyrant or ruler or disbeliever? Why do we see that they never called to revolution or political infiltration or parties? This cannot be found in the call of any prophet or messenger in the Quran. Not Nuh alayhi salam, not Ibrahim alayhi salam, all the way to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. What's the reason for that? The reason for it is very clear. As the Shaykh says, فَلَيْسَ فِي مَشَاكِلِ الْبَشَرِ there is not in all of the difficulties of mankind. Amongst mankind, we have all sorts of difficulties. There are political difficulties, right? There are political circumstances in countries. There are economic difficulties in many countries, Muslim countries. There are social difficulties and dangers in all of the lands. However, do these difficulties equal the difficulties and the dangers of shirk and corrupt beliefs? The answer is very clear that they do not come anywhere near the danger of these affairs which corrupt the creed. The Shaykh mentions those ayat in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. That Allah does not forgive that anything should be that partners should be established for Him in worship, but He forgives whatever is less than that to whomever He wills. Likewise, إِنَّهُ مَن يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. That indeed whoever commits shirk with Allah, Allah has prohibited or made unlawful for him paradise. وَمَأْوَاهُ النَّارِ. And his abode is in the hellfire. The Shaykh mentions some ayat like this, and then he gives a number of really beautiful examples to help us understand this issue. He says that when these types of mashakil engulf the ummah, these are issues that could be to do with belief, for example. Across all of the Muslim world, there are mashakil aqadiyya, to do with belief. Right? We know that in the Muslim land there are people worshipping graves, going to tombs. They believe, they even give attributes of rububiyyah to some of these people who are either living or dead. These are corruptions in belief. At the same time, there are corruptions in economy. Likewise, there are corruptions in politics. Right? So likewise, there is corruption in terms of the rule, the rulership. So the Shaykh says, what is the way of the prophets in dealing with these issues? They did not begin except with that which is the most dangerous thing to the society. He then gives us a number of examples to put this into context and to put the idea firmly into our minds. He says, imagine you have a serpent, right? A serpent with a sting. And then at the same time you see these ants. There's loads of ants. Which of the two, if you were faced with these two things, would you turn your attention to? Right? The intelligent people would turn to the serpent and they would try to kill the serpent first because of the severe danger of the serpent. And as for the ants, they would not pay any attention to the ants, even if there were 1,000 ants. You would pay no attention to them. Your immediate goal would be to kill the serpent. A second example the Shaykh gives is that when intelligent people see a lion, and then at the same time you see a load of mice, a group of mice, and they would go to kill the lion first, and they would forget the mice, and even if there was like frogs and other things, you wouldn't pay any attention to any of that at all. And likewise, he says, a third example, if any of you was to travel on a journey and it came to a point where if you went in this direction, you would have a volcano that is spewing lava and shooting out debris, which is burning the trees, burning the houses, burning the roads. And then on this side you had another road in which there are thorns and plants and a baked earth which is hard to walk upon. Would you choose this one or would you choose that one? Right? Which of the two dangers would you try to avoid? So in the same way, this is the same comparison. When you have the danger of corruption in creed, a man believes that he can invoke a saint, that he hears him and he can help him from a distance. Right? This is the greatest shirk by which nations are ruined, nations are destroyed. Is that more dangerous? Should that be treated first? Or is it a man, where there's economic injustice and there's no jobs, there's no employment, and the ruler might be corrupt, or the rulership, the hukum is not present, so people are treated unjustly, and there's no hudud, and there's no this or whatever, right? And there's highway robbery, and there's this. Which of the two are more dangerous? Right? In the scale of the Quran and the Sunnah, in the scale of the prophets and messengers, there is nothing more dangerous than the issue of this Tawheed. And there are many, many examples, many evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah to prove this. One of those which comes later on is the fact that the Messenger of Allah himself, when he was advancing to the battle of Hunayn, and the companions were new to Islam, and they passed by a tree, and the pagans used to use that tree to hang their swords as a type of like seeking barakah and blessing for victory. And they said, could you make for us like a Dhat Anwat, like they have a Dhat Anwat? And the Messenger of Allah, remember, this is on the way to battle with the people of disbelief, and he reprimanded them in the most severe of ways, and he treated their statement to be the same as the statement of those who said to Musa alayhi salam, make for us a god as they have gods. Right? And so the point being that the issue of creed is the most grave and the most serious. The Shaykh then goes on to mention why this is, and why the prophets and messengers, why the method that they followed is from wisdom and intellect. Is from wisdom and intellect. It is from hikmah and from aql, that the methodology they were given to rectify the society, being from Allah, that it agrees with and is from wisdom and intellect. He gives us three explanations why this is. The first of them is that he says, that we just mentioned, that the deviation in creed is thousands of times more dangerous and more harmful to the society than the deviation of any other type that we see in the society, a point that he also already mentioned. The second reason that we see is that in the Quran, when Allah Azza wa Jal speaks about the role of the prophets and messengers, they are given three roles. They are muballighun, they are those who convey, they make tabligh, they convey the message. They make the mubashirun, they convey the glad tidings. And they are munzirun, they make indhar, they warn the people of the consequences of not believing and obeying. And that's what we see in the Quran. This is how Allah Azza wa Jal has described them. كان الناس أمة واحدة فبعث الله النبيين مبشرين ومنذرين. That mankind was one nation, and then Allah sent the prophets as those who give glad tidings and as those who warn. And he mentions many similar ayat like this. فَهَلْ عَلَى الرُّسُلِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ. Is there anything upon the messengers except to make plain the conveyance, to convey plainly? He mentions ayat like this. So from this, what do we understand? Or what do we do not understand? We do not understand that the prophets were revolutionaries. We do not understand that the prophets were thinkers, mufakkirun. We do not understand that the prophets were philosophers. We do not understand that the prophets were politicians. There's none of this in the Quran. In the Quran, it is tabligh, wa tabshir, wa indhar. This is the role of the prophets and messengers. Conversely, you see either among the kuffar, people of disbelief, they are the ones who say the prophets and messengers were just intelligent people with creative imaginations, very skillful, good orators. They wanted to rectify the society, so they made these stories up about paradise and hellfire, and then they just, gave a law that they made themselves. So they were thinkers, politicians, philosophers, and very smart ones, and that's how they did what they did. Following those people of disbelief, amongst the Muslims are those misguided people, the likes of Ibn Sina and people like that, who say that prophethood can be acquired. You can become a prophet. It's simply just a type of philosophy. And there are others, mufakkirun, who think that, rectifying Islam, rectifying the society is to do with fikr and thought. And all of this is misguidance. We do not find this in the Quran. In the Quran, it is conveyance of the revelation, explaining what it is. It is giving glad tidings to those who believe and obey, and warning those who disbelieve and disobey. The third, and this is the most amazing of points that you should pay attention to. He says the third reason why you see that the call of the prophets began with and was centered around the issue of Tawheed and the danger of shirk is because he says that when you look at the call to establish a dawlah, to establish a state, to remove one dawlah and to put another dawlah in its place, this type of arena is one which brings with it all the murkiness of politics. It brings with it all of the aghrad, the desires that exist in men, and the matami', like the things that people pursue, the ambitions that people have, people who seek position, people who seek wealth, people who seek, all of these. And likewise, there's also the grievances that people have, right? So when it comes to the issue of politics and establishing a state and establishing the rule, automatically it draws all of these types of orientations, these desires, these ambitions, these things that people which exist in the hearts. And that's why politics is murky. And so the Shaykh says, conversely, when you invite only to singling out Allah in worship, calling to Tawheed, and warning from shirk, then and it's with sincerity, it is with nush to the ummah, then you find that these types of matami' and ahqad, these jealousies, grievances, ambitions, desires, seeking wealth, seeking position, and all of the machinations of politics, you see that they are absent. And this is because the nature of Tawheed itself and the nature of obeying Allah with sincerity. And that's why, my brothers and sisters, you will realize why the Khawarij have never ever established a state, nor will they ever establish a state. Why? Because the very field of activity they are involved in, from its very nature, it emanates from grievance, from being upset with the ruler or with his rule, or being upset for not receiving money or position. This is really the essence, the foundation of the bid'ah of the Khawarij, and likewise the Rawafid. So anytime you see people involved in this type of call, this is why it is ripe for infiltration and misdirection and all sorts of evils and things that come with it, which harms the ummah even more. And that's why we know from direct experience in our time that all of these jama'at and these firq and these groups, whether they are the Khawarij, whether they are the Rafidah, they are infiltrated by hypocrites, by the people of disbelief, by the agencies who direct them in whichever way they want, whether it be ISIS, Daesh, as we see, completely infiltrated. To the degree that you see that these people are the most foolish and dumb-witted of people. Look at this fool, for example, Anjem Chaudhry. Underground trying to revive this group called Al-Muhajirun, and then they go by different names, the Muslim Thinkers Society and this society, and he got stung because the Canadian and the US intelligence agencies infiltrated his online operations, found him really calling to what he's calling to, and they've stung him, and now he's got life in prison. So what good have you done to the ummah now? Or to yourself, to your family, to the Muslims? What good have you done to the ummah with a heretical doctrine? Right? And this is what happens with these people. Right? Politics is murky. It draws all of the people of insincerity, of desires, of goals, of ambitions, until all becomes really murky. As opposed to those who follow the way of the prophets and messengers, what do they want? They want the people for Tawheed to be rooted in their hearts, for them to single out Allah in worship, for them to establish their obligations, for them to earn the pleasure of Allah. And this can only be done with ikhlas. So here there is ikhlas, over there is murkiness, there is cloudiness, right? And this is how these people, and that's why the Khawarij, that because it is all about leadership, money, they end up fighting each other, devolving, splitting, arguing, and they end up slaughtering themselves. This has happened in history. The first example of the Khawarij, first the Muhakkimah, and then came like the Azariqa, and then different groups, different types, they began to disagree with each other on issues of takfir and rulership, and then they began to make takfir of each other, and then slaughter each other, they devolve, and they end up fizzling out, and this recurs and happens through history, right? Because none of that is upon ikhlas, upon sincerity, it's not upon the right methodology, and this is the inevitable end result of that type of call. So, this first issue then is what distinguishes the people of Tawheed, the people upon the way of the Salaf, from all other calls, that irrespective of what the circumstances might be, whether it is poverty or riches, whether it is economic ascendancy or decline, whatever the politics might be, they do not abandon this methodology for anything, because this is what the prophets and messengers were upon, because this is what brings the aid and the help of Allah. Now, to close off this first this first foundation, the Shaykh, Hafidhahullah, gives again two beautiful examples to show, to put the idea firmly in our minds as to how we should think about this. He says, let's take the prayer for example. Let's take the prayer for example. We know that the Messenger of Allah, he taught us that the prayer, he said, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli, pray as you've seen me pray. And we know that the prayer for example, it begins with a takbir, and then we recite, and then we do the ruku, and then the sujood, and then we do the same in the second rak'ah, and then there's the tashahhud, the first one. There's a certain tartib, right? And the prayer is not accepted except in this way, because Allah Azza wa Jal has revealed it in this manner. Now, if someone came along and he said, if a jama'ah came and said that because we are living in a different time today, in this asr, that what is obligatory is that we begin with the salam first, the taslim first, and we end with the takbir, and that the sujood, we do it before the ruku. So we make sujood first, and then we do the ruku after that. And, then we make the tashahhud, we put it in the place of the Fatiha. And the Fatiha, we put it in the place of the tashahhud. Why? Because we need to make these changes, because the society has changed, and it requires... If someone was to say this, would you... this would be kufr to begin with. But what this person is doing is no different to the one who tries to alter and change the methodology of the prophets in calling to Allah. There is no difference. Why? Because the call to Allah is the way Allah guided the prophets and messengers to rectify their nations, the nation of Nuh alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, all the prophets and messengers. They were given a specific methodology with a tartib to follow. Despite all the circumstances being present to deal with politics or economy or the society, they were all present. Despite that, Allah guided and directed the prophets upon a methodology of rectification that is to be followed. That can never ever be abandoned. And to abandon that and to change that and play about with that, as we see the jama'at, this is no different to doing to the prayer what we just mentioned. He also gives a second example, which is that of a hajj. He says, in the same way, خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكُكُمْ, take from me, خُذُوا عَنِّي مَنَاسِكُكُمْ, take from me your rituals of hajj. We know that hajj, that Arafah, for example, there's a certain day on the 9th day, and the certain things that we do on certain days. If someone was to come along and say, as the Shaykh says, the Arafah will be on the 7th, and then the Tawaf al-Ifada will be, on a certain day, and it will be, in a certain place, not around the Kaaba. And when someone starts playing around and does all these things, then we know this is actual misguidance. Right? So this is the end of the first foundation that distinguishes the people of Tawheed from, all other calls, all other, firaq and jama'at. The second distinguishing feature or principle of those upon the way of the Salaf is that they call to the book and the Sunnah, and they unite the people upon the book and the Sunnah. Right? So this differs. We don't call to Sufism. We don't start with Sufism. We don't call to Kalam and Falsafa, which is employing the intellect. We don't call to politics and siyasa. The first thing that we call to is for people to understand and act upon the book and the Sunnah, and to unite them upon the book and the Sunnah. It is not some Sufi spirituality. It is not some rational philosophy to liberate the mind, and it is not politics and fiqh. What we unite the people around is al-kitab wa sunnah. The Shaykh goes on to establish, in fact he mentions numerous evidences for all of this. Some of the ayat, وَاعْتَسِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Hold all of you to the rope of Allah and do not be divided. وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. And this is my straight path, so follow it, and do not follow other paths lest they divert you from his path. So there are many other ayat, many other evidences also, but this is a proof that we call the people to the kitab and the sunnah and unite them upon that. As for the people of batil, people of falsehood, the Shaykh says that they desire yuridun an yajma'ul ummah ala al-batil. They desire to unite the ummah upon falsehood. We desire to unite upon the Quran and the Sunnah. They desire to unite upon falsehood. And they think that this tajammu', that just to bring bodies together, that this will be sufficient for the ummah. That this will be sufficient to bring it back to nobility and to save it in this life and the next. The Shaykh says this is not the way of rectification. Right? These people who say, that, like you see today, people consider the Rawafid, the Rafida and the extreme Sufi, that we unite with them and we liberate the Ummah. This is a dream. This is not going to happen. The Shaykh says this is not the way of Islah, and the way of Islah is the Kitab of Allah and the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu upon the way of the Salaf. He says in another place, he says that what is correct is that this political Ikhwani type of treatment and cure, which has been there for 70 years and which gathers together the Rawafid and the Sufiya and even the Nasara, brings them all together under one umbrella. This will never ever end the mashakil, the problems of the Muslimin. It will only increase them in their severity and their strength. And so he says these people never cease to be distant from the book and the Sunnah and the manhaj of the Salaf and their methodologies, even to the extent that they become callers to the unity of religion. Right? So when you start off with this notion of we just unite everybody, we overlook the differences even if they are fundamental, then you start with the Sufis, the Rawafid, the Ikhwanis, and then to expand further, then all of a sudden the Nasara who are in your country, because in the Muslim lands there are Arab, there are Nasara who are Arab, there are communists who are Arab, there are all sorts of orientations, Ba'athists who are Arab, right? So therefore you end up in a situation that in, for example, Palestine, for example, if you now make the call to be Arab nationalism, or you make it to be, that means now the Nasrani has now entered your ranks. The Nasrani has entered your ranks. Right? And the Shiyu'i has entered your ranks. And when you have these type of people by your side, then that is a sure recipe for defeat and humiliation. The Shaykh mentions the hadith, إِذَا تَبَايَعْتُمْ بِالْعِينَةِ وَرَضِيتُمْ بِالزَّرْعِ وَاتَّبَعْتُمْ أَذْنَابَ الْبَقَرِ وَتَرَكْتُمُ الْجِهَادِ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ سَلَّطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ ذُلًّا. That when you deal in ina transactions and you are satisfied with agriculture and you take hold of the tails of the cows and oxen and you abandon jihad in Allah's path, then Allah will unleash upon you a humiliation. And He will not remove it until you return, حَتَّى تَرْجِعُوا إِلَى دِينِكُمْ, till you return to your religion. What is the deen? It is Tawheed, abandoning shirk. It is Islam and Iman and Ihsan. It is Kitab and Sunnah. This is what we have been told is the means of removal of this humiliation. The Shaykh then, so this really, we'll keep it brief to get through the rest of the principles. The second distinguishing principle is that we call to the Kitab and the Sunnah and we unite the people upon the Kitab and the Sunnah. The third distinguishing principle is that we follow the Sunnah and the Jama'ah and we actively remove and we warn against shudud, khilaf, furqa, which is separation, splitting, differing. And this, in fact, is what Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala mentions in his creed. He states it in his creed. What does he say? He says, وَنَتَّبِعُ السُّنَّةَ وَالْجَمَاعَةَ وَنَجْتَنِبُ الشُّذُوذ وَالْخِلَافِ وَالْفُرْقَةِ. So this is directly what Imam al-Tahawi, after mentioning all of the affairs of creed, he makes this statement as if this statement encompasses everything that came before it. Right? That from the usul of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah is that we maintain unity by following the Sunnah. Right? This is the basis of unity. And we follow the Jama'ah. And we abandon all causes of shudud, ikhtilaf and firqa. Now the Shaykh, Hafidhahullah, he wrote many refutations of people who try to destroy this foundation. From them is a man called Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq. This man was from Egypt, an Ikhwani. He went to Kuwait and he took his takfiri Ikhwani methodology and he began to invent principles and alter and distort the Salafi methodology. So from the things he began to say is that the presence of all of these jama'at present today, whether they are Tabligh or Ikhwan or Hizb ut-Tahrir, all of these are positive for the da'wah. And why? Because they encourage this competition in the field of da'wah and people get engaged in da'wah. This was the type of thinking and the mentality he tried to infuse in among the Salafis. And we know that this is from the greatest of corruption and the greatest of evil. Why? Because these groups, in reality, they are simply an extension of the firaq, the actual sect, even if they just take names and labels like, Jama'atul Tabligh and Ikhwan al-Muslimun and Hizb ut-Tahrir and, whatever name they might give. The actual reality is that these are groups of Sufism and Ash'arism and I'tizal, the way of the Mu'tazila and the Jahmiyyah and the way of the Khawarij. Right? They are carrying that poison, but they are just, taking these different names. The Shaykh wrote a great deal in refutation of this, and he established what is correct, which is that we unite upon the Sunnah and the Jama'ah, and we dispel all of the ways and means of splitting and separation. So in this respect, the Shaykh, there's many statements here. I'll just give one or two. He addresses this man, Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq, who was declared a Mubtadi'. And he says to him that if you were to go and read the books of Ibn Taymiyyah and all the scholars, you will never ever find in their writings this methodology that you are claiming, what you are claiming. Their statements are very, very clear that the way to unity and strength is upon the Sunnah and the Jama'ah. And as for what you're claiming, that all of these firaq and jama'at, that they are positive and that they are good for the ummah, And this is totally false. The Shaykh goes on to say that we believe and we hold that it is not permissible for us to have this tafarruq which has happened in this ummah, the ummah splitting into all these sects and groups. Rather, we follow the Sunnah and the Jama'ah, and the Jama'ah of the Muslimin. We do not enter into any ways or means that leads to the splitting and to the erosion of this Jama'ah, whether it is behind the ruler or whether it is upon a sound creed, because this is one of the entry points of the people of disbelief to enter turmoil into the Muslim lands, right? They find disgruntled groups, then they start funding them and supporting them, then they foment a revolution, then they destroy whatever stability there might be in that nation so that they can then intervene and then steal the resources, invade, bring another, right? This is what we have examples of this in our time, right? Libya, Syria, Iraq. And the amazing thing is that in all of these three countries, these rulers were actually declared to be disbelievers, right? The scholars of the Muslims declared these people to be disbelievers. Saddam, Ba'athi. In Syria, what are they? They are Alawi's, Nusayris, from the greatest of disbelievers. Gaddafi. Some scholars made takfir of him because of his green book, his socialism, and things that he said about some of the Quran and some acts of worship. Now, in all of these three countries, what do you see? That people are disgruntled and happy about the situation, about the economy, about oppression, right? And it's a bad situation, no doubt. It's a bad situation. But even in these scenarios, what did the people of Tawheed and Sunnah, what do they say? They say, even though he is a disbeliever, let alone a sinful, tyrannical Muslim, we still advise you to have sabr. Because Allah will make a way out, and the reason why you have this tyrannical ruler is because he is just a manifestation of the people. Right? He is just a manifestation. He's taking shape and form as the actions of the people. So have sabr, and Allah will find a way out. But when the people don't listen to this, and they want to remove the ruler, even though it would be permissible to do so, if they had the means and the ability, and the effects, there would be less evil, and there would not be more bloodshed. Right? They didn't listen. And so from the outside, we have the people of disbelief funding these groups, fomenting and who ends up suffering the most? It is Sunni Muslims, whether in Iraq, whether in Syria, right? And this is what happens. And now the resources have been stolen, looted, in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq, right? And so what was the benefit in all of this? So this shows that the people of Tawheed and the Sunnah, that their manhaj, their way, is one of aql and hikmah, because they look at the long term. They are thinking decades and decades in advance. Whereas that Khariji, dumb-witted, narrow, small-brain mind is thinking only of like next week or next month or next year or whatever it might be. And they don't think of the consequences that it brings upon the ummah. Right? So this is why that we maintain the Sunnah and the Jama'ah. We maintain unity upon the Sunnah and the Jama'ah, and we do not create shudud, whether that be among the Muslims with false beliefs and false methodologies, or whether it be in terms of causing dissension and harm in the society by destabilizing society and calling for khuruj and calling for like what the Ikhwan and the Rawafid and the Khawarij, what they do. Why? Because this leads to greater harm upon the ummah. The fourth distinguishing feature is al-amr bil-ma'ruf wal-nahi anil munkar, commanding the good and prohibiting the evil, and likewise an-nush, sincere advice to the Muslims, giving sincerity of advice. All of these are together as one principle. The hadith, man ra'a minkum munkara falyughayyirhu biyadihi. So that hadith the Shaykh mentions, whoever amongst you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. The Shaykh goes on to say that very sadly, when the Muslims do not implement this foundation, this is when the door opens for atheism, heresy, secularism, nationalism. All of these things start to penetrate the Muslims. The Shaykh is lamenting the fact that the Muslim scholars did not do enough from the beginning. Right? It doesn't mean that nobody wrote. There were scholars who wrote and refuted these things, but the Shaykh is saying that not enough of the Muslim scholars voiced their opposition against these ideologies, as a result of which Arab nationalism came into the Arabs, secularism has entered into the Muslim lands. There is all types of heresy from the Rawafid and from the atheists. Right? So enjoining the good and prohibiting the evil has to take place from the very, very beginning. He mentioned some ahadith. ما من نبي بعثه الله في أمة قبلي إلا كان له من أمته حواريون وأصحاب يأخذون بسنته ويقتدون بأمره. He mentioned that hadith that never was there a prophet whom Allah sent in a nation before me, except that he had from his ummah helpers and aiders. They take from his sunnah and they follow his command. And then after them there came a people who began, people who began to say what they did not do, and they began to do what they were not commanded. So whoever strives against them with his hand, he is a believer. Whoever strives against them with his tongue, he is a believer. And whoever strives against them with his heart, he is a believer. This hadith is an asl, a foundation, in showing that there is commanding the good and prohibiting the evil, and there is struggling and striving against those who deviate, who say that which they do not do, and who do that which they are not commanded. And this is the people of bid'ah, the people of dalalah, and what they bring into this ummah. The Shaykh then goes on to mention how the Sahaba and the Salaf enacted this principle. He gives many examples. The example of Umar bin al-Khattab striking Sabir, the one who brought questions and philosophy and kalam, putting doubts in the hearts of the people, asking, what does this ayah mean? What does this ayah mean? Likewise, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu freeing himself from the Qadariyah. Likewise, the example of Ali fighting the Khawarij by the command of the Messenger of Allah. Likewise, Ibn Mas'ud, and when those people were counting doing tasbih upon the pebbles, and he came and he told them off. This is an example of enjoining the good, prohibiting the evil. And likewise, many, many other examples can be given from the Salaf, even to the extent that they wrote books. Imam al-Bukhari wrote a book, Khalq Af'al al-Ibad, Refutation of the Jahmiyyah, Refutation of the Qadariyah, Kitab al-Sunnah, of the Sunnah of Imam Ahmed, As-Sunnah of Al-Khalla. All these books that we know familiar with, this is an example of enjoining the good and prohibiting the evil. Then likewise, the Shaykh goes on to explain the issue of sincerity of purpose to the ummah and nush lil ummah, that this is the way of the people of Tawheed and the Sunnah, which means that you give sincerity of purpose to Allah, to His book, to the Messenger, to the rulers of the Muslims, and to the common folk. Why? Because the majority of the religion, ad-dinun nasiha, the religion, the bulk of it is an-nasiha. Just in the same way as the Messenger of Allah said, al-hajju arafah. Right? The bulk of the Hajj is the standing at Arafah. In the same way, the bulk of our religion is being sincere. Having sincerity of purpose to Allah and to His book and to His messenger and to the leaders of the Muslims and to their common folk. The Shaykh goes on to explain that this is, that when he gives a good example, he shows, look, the way of the people of Tawheed and the Sunnah, that when they correct mistakes, and when they correct mistakes, that when they correct mistakes, they do it out of sincere love for the Muslims and to correct them and to protect them in their religion. he makes a comparison between some deviated individuals. He says, for example, when you look at these Haddadis extremists, mentions a couple of names, Abdul Latif, Bashmil, people like that. They used to attack Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala. And there was a group of people like that, Abdul Latif Bashmil, Mahmoud al-Haddad, people like that. And they would make this big issue about the errors of Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala. And they would correct them and refute them and so on and so forth, and they would spread them amongst the people. And the Shaykh says, Shaykh Rabi is saying that yes, that whatever errors Shaykh Rabi might have had, because there were differences between Shaykh al-Albani and some of the mashayikh in certain issues, like the niqab, for example, and other issues, fiqh issues. However, we find that these refutations coming from these other scholars is from the angle of love and brotherhood and seeking the truth and to look at the evidences. It comes from the angle of love, mahabba, wanting for your brother what you want for yourself, to follow the sunnah and to find the truth, right? This is very different to these Haddadiyah, who their muntaliq, they're like the place of origin is out of hiqd, it is out of envy, it is out of hatred, it is out of enmity. That's why you are pointing and seeking out mistakes. It is not out of an-nush lil ummah. It is not from that hadith ad-deenun nasiha. It is from something else, right? And that's why this is the way of all of the people of bid'ah, whether it is like the fanatical Hanafis, they will refute the people of the Sunnah. Why? Because you have bigotry to a school of thought, or it's the Khawarij, or it's anyone else. It is from hiqd. Whereas the people of the Sunnah, when they refute someone, when they point out the errors of someone, it is not because we hate that individual as an individual. It is because we want you to be upon the haqq, upon the truth, and to follow, right guidance. I'll have to cut that short. There's a lot more, but just to finish, because I have to complete now, inshallah. The final distinguishing feature is ar-raddu ala al-mukhalif, which is refutation of the opposer. The Shaykh mentions many evidences from the Quran for this. وَلَا يَأْتُونَكَ بِمَثَلٍ إِلَّا جِئْنَاكَ بِالْحَقِّ وَأَحْسَنَ تَفْسِيرًا. That they do not bring to you any similitude, meaning in argument, O Muhammad, except that we bring to you the truth and the better explanation thereof. Right? This is all the shubuhat that are brought by the people of disbelief. وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلِتَسْتَبِينَ سَبِيلُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. First we make clear to you the ayat, and in order that the path of the criminals may be made apparent and clear. The scholars say that this shows that the Messenger of Allah was given every argument, every proof to make the truth clear from the falsehood. So these are some general evidences. The Shaykh goes on to mention other evidences. Even the fact that Hassan bin Thabit would be commanded to ridicule and mock the people of disbelief in poetry, right, to refute their arguments and to belittle them in the form of poetry. He mentions that example as well. All these evidences to show that Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah came with falsifying falsehood and refuting the opposer, no matter who might that be. Now this is a discussion in itself. How do we refute the people of bid'ah? How do we refute a mukhalif from within Ahlus Sunnah? This is a whole issue in and of itself. But I'll stop here because I've come to the end of the time. So the fifth principle is that distinguishes the people of Tawheed and Sunnah is ar-raddu ala al-mukhalif. They refute every mukhalif, and they refute him with knowledge and with justice, with whatever he deserves. And so to close then, we mentioned 5 distinguishing foundations. The first of them, adhering to the methodology of the prophets no matter what the circumstances in calling to Tawheed. Number 2, calling to the Quran and the Sunnah. That's what we call people to. And not to a madhab, not to any party, it's to that, and we unite the people upon that. Thirdly, we follow the Sunnah and the Jama'ah. we avoid all the causes of differing and separating, whether it be in beliefs, methodologies, or physically in terms of arousing people and against the authorities and creating dissension therein. Fourthly, commending good, prohibiting evil, and fifthly, refuting the opposer. So with that, we'll conclude our lesson there for today. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.